The West spent decades trying to bring China into the world, and then woke up to find China bringing the world into its orbit. Factories, ports, apps, shipping lanes. Suddenly the center of gravity shifted and everyone acted surprised. What no textbook explains is that the West didn't just miscalculate China's power, it misunderstood China's identity. For 200 years the prediction stayed the same. Trade will soften it, prosperity will liberalize it, exposure will make it like us. And every time the outcome shocked Western capitals. Now that blind spot shapes everything. Trade wars and tech bans, Taiwan's tense horizon, supply chain anxiety, censorship fights, and the deeper argument underneath, whose idea of freedom and order defines the future for the next century. In the late 1700s, the world was being stitched together by sales, cannons, and contracts. Britain arrived in China with the instincts of a rising empire. Negotiate access, sign a treaty, expand trade, one sovereign to another on paper as equals. In 1793, Lord Macartney's mission carried gifts, maps, and an assumption that diplomacy worked the same everywhere. But inside the Qing court the logic was different. This wasn't a marketplace of nations. It was a moral universe with a center, a hierarchy, and carefully controlled exchange meant to preserve stability. Where Britain saw commerce and parity, the Qing saw order and ritual, an emperor receiving distant visitors, not bargaining with a peer. Each side left with its dignity intact and its expectations unchanged. From that first meeting, both sides walked away thinking they'd been understood. Neither had. Curiosity didn't last. As British demand for tea and silk surged, silver drained out of London, and the empire went looking for a solution that wasn't a bargain, but a leverage point. Opium became that lever. In China, officials saw addiction spread and social order fray. In Britain, merchants and policymakers framed the trade as a matter of access and principle. When the Qing tried to stop it, confiscating and destroying opium in 1839, the response wasn't negotiation. It was force. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, wasn't just a conflict over cargo. It was a collision between two moral stories, the West speaking the language of free trade and legal rights, and China experiencing gunboats in its rivers and foreign troops dictating terms. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842 pried open ports, ceded Hong Kong, and set the template for what Chinese history would later call the unequal treaties. A second war followed in the 1850s, tightening the screws. To many in the West, this was the world becoming modern. To China, it became the opening wound of the century of humiliation. The West thought it had opened China. China remembered it as being broken open. After the treaties came the unraveling. The Qing dynasty didn't just lose wars, it lost legitimacy. Inside China, rebellions and famine exposed a state that could no longer protect its people or its borders. Outside, the empire was treated less like a civilization and more like a prize, sliced into spheres of influence, mapped by foreign planners, patrolled by foreign soldiers. In treaty ports, Chinese streets filled with foreign flags, foreign police, foreign courts. Concessions became little islands of humiliation, where power spoke a different language. By 1900, anger boiled into the Boxer Rebellion, part desperate uprising, part national scream, and was answered by a foreign coalition marching into Beijing. A decade later, the Qing collapsed in 1911, but the fall didn't bring peace. The republic fractured. Warlords rose. Invasion pressures grew. What replaced order was vulnerability. This is the trauma Western policy often forgets. The West tends to treat China as a new power learning modern rules. China remembers itself as an ancient civilization forced to sign away control, rules written by others and enforced at gunpoint. That memory doesn't fade, it hardens into instinct. If you don't understand the trauma, you misread the response, and the response was revolution. Then came 1949, the hinge of modern China. After invasion, occupation, and a brutal civil war, the People's Republic of China was founded with a message that was less utopian than it was defensive. Order would be restored and humiliation would never return. For a society that had watched governments collapse and foreigners dictate terms, sovereignty wasn't a slogan. It was the only guarantee that the country wouldn't be carved up again. That became the governing bargain, stated plainly. The state would deliver unity, stability, development, and national revival, and in return, it would demand obedience and control. Chaos wasn't a theoretical risk debated in newspapers. It was a lived memory. Famine, warlords, refugees, cities under occupation. This is where the Western misread hardens. Many in the West framed China's new system mainly as communist ideology, assuming it would eventually soften under prosperity or pressure. China also saw it as reconstruction, a rebuilt state designed to prevent another century of weakness. The West looked for elections as the proof of progress. China looked for control as the proof of survival. After Mao, China didn't abandon control, it redesigned it. Deng Xiaoping's reforms after 1978 were revolutionary precisely because they were not romantic. They were pragmatic. Open markets, invite investment, learn fast, get rich, but never hand over the steering wheel. The party would loosen the economy without loosening its monopoly on political power. It was determination with guardrails, ambition with a lock on the door. In the West, a powerful story took hold: convergence. If China traded with the world, built a middle class and connected to global institutions, it would inevitably liberalize. Prosperity would produce pluralism. Integration would produce alignment. Then came 1989, Tiananmen, as a brutal rupture, a signal that the state would choose stability over Western expectations, even at enormous cost. And yet, the optimism returned. When China entered the WTO in 2001, many Western leaders treated it like a finishing step in a one-way journey toward normalization. But the deal was never the same on both sides. The West believed integration would make China more like the West, more open, more constrained, more predictable. China believed integration would make China strong enough that no one could ever dictate terms again, economically, militarily, or culturally. Both sides signed the same contract, each reading a different language. By the 2010s, the misunderstanding stopped being academic and became strategic. Under Xi, China doubled down on the things the West assumed would fade: party authority, narrative control, and a security-first state. Belt and Road in 2013 projected infrastructure and influence outward, not as charity, but as a statement that China could build networks without Western permission. Then the rivalry sharpened, trade fights in the late 2010s, followed by a tech and supply chain Cold War in the 2020s, export controls, chip restrictions, investment screening, and the scramble to de-risk. Underneath the policies are two moral languages colliding. The West tends to prioritize individual rights, transparency, and open information as the baseline of legitimacy. China prioritizes cohesion, regime security, national rejuvenation, and control of narratives as the baseline of survival. The West keeps asking, why won't China become like us? China keeps asking, why won't the West stop trying to reshape us? And that misunderstanding is now a geopolitical weapon. It's two maps laid over the same territory, each side certain the other is lost. The West sees a future threatened by control. China sees a past returning through pressure. So what comes next? Containment and escalation, or real literacy in each other's histories? If you want the next chapter, how this rivalry could end, watch the story on your screen.